Okay, so this is practice SAC number 1, and these are dot-pointed solutions for you to use so that you can practice writing full responses. Okay, so you can dot point to start with. You might want to have a notepad and pen, write down question 1, do your dot points, but you when you submit this for me to have a look at, I don't want to see dot points, I want to see full sentences and paragraphs, because that's what you need to be practicing. Okay, question 1. The most important purpose of the Australian Constitution is that it acts as a check on Parliament. So this is what we've been studying. This is our, that's interesting. So that's what we've been studying. That's what this dot point covers. Those checks on Parliament. There was 5 of them. There was bicameral system, there was the separation of powers, express rights, the High Court interpretations, and the double majority. Okay, so you can expect question 1 to be about checks. Explain how the Australian Constitution separates lawmaking powers, and explain how and why it is important that it acts as a check on the lawmaking powers of Parliament. Right, so for starters, our task word is explain in both cases. So for explain, we don't need to be doing arguments. So there's no strengths or weaknesses in this. It's just explaining those 2 things. The first thing, explain how the Australian Constitution separates lawmaking powers. So that's your first half. Your second half, explain how and why it is important that it acts as a check on the lawmaking powers. Okay, so the first bit, explain how the Australian Constitution separates lawmaking powers. The Constitution separates lawmaking powers into 3 arms. You need to state those 3 arms and explain what they are and what they do. So the first arm is the legislature or the legislative arm. That's Parliament, and it has the power to create laws. The second arm is the executive. It has the power to administer and implement laws, and that's the Governor-General signing off on those powers and on those laws on the advice of the government. And the judicial arm is the power to enforce the law and settle any legal disputes about the law, and that's the courts. So that's your first part. How and why it's important that it acts as a check. The powers are separated to ensure that there is not a concentration of power, and therefore an abuse of power. It gives the courts, given that the courts are independent of political influence, the Constitution's separation of powers can act as a check on the lawmaking powers of Parliament. It is important. So that's how. It separates the power out so we don't have a concentration of power, and it makes sure that the courts are totally independent of any kind of political influence, remembering the executive is, although it's the Governor-General, it is the Prime Minister and the senior ministers, and the Governor-General is only ever acting on the advice of the government, so it is political. The courts, however, are completely independent of any political influence. The Constitution's separation of power can act as a check, and why it's important that the citizens are able to take action through the courts if they believe that the Australian Parliament has acted outside its lawmaking powers. The courts are able to rule in a fair manner as they remain independent of the legislature and the executive. And that's your 6 marks there.